Hello, I'm Elizabeth Engelhardt. I'm a professor in the Department of American Studies here at the University of Texas. Originally, I'm from Western North Carolina. My mom's family arrived in the mountains of North Carolina in 1790, so I have a long history in that particular part of the South. Now I live in Texas, so that means I've lived in a couple of different communities here in the US South, and I've tried very hard to understand the history and literature and culture of this region. That means I understand the good about this place and the bad about this place. Some of our best ideas as a nation have played out here, and some of our worst moments of violence and exclusion have happened here. We also live in a generation where we have great societal interests in matters of food. We have debates over how we're going to feed ourselves, how we're going to be healthy as individuals, as a society. And we talk about our food when we introduce ourselves. These days we say, I eat locally, or I eat organically, or I love barbecue, or I just love fast food, I'm a foodie, I participate in competitive eating. All of those things are ways of saying who we are. Those two worlds come together in my professional life because I'm at the leading edge of a generation of scholars who are creating an academic field that's called food studies in the humanities. The basic idea of food studies in the humanities is that food and culture are inextricable, that there are few better ways to understand who we are than using our food. Now, I mean food very broadly in that sentence, so not just what makes it to the table that we all sit down to eat, but also how plants and animals begin in our fields, in our farms, on our ranches, in our gardens, move to our groceries, to our markets, to our kitchens, become ingredients, become recipes, become meals, become memories. I mean the drinks at the table, I mean the processes about who cooks and who sits and who serves and what we don't eat. All of those stories are part of food studies. But in order to do this, we have to figure out some sources. And so in the humanities, we look to literature and history. We look to cookbooks and recipes, but also things like songs and interviews and stories. There's one more thing that I feel comfortable saying about the US South, and that is Southerners love their food. And we love to talk about our food. That's helpful. I have colleagues in other parts of the country who are doing these kinds of projects, but I would argue that because here in the South we do so much conversation about food, we're a very good crucible for doing these projects. I'm going to give away my conclusion here. We're headed to an argument that food studies can connect our best practices in universities with our best knowledge in communities. And that has the potential to be truly transformative. When we bring together an academic lens to those worlds, then we can access a complex racial, gender, class, political identities of our past and of our present. So let me give you an example. I'm going to describe a sample Southern meal. Let's make it in the summer. This one takes place in Western North Carolina. We're going to sit down at the table, and let's put that table pretty close to a garden because we need some things out of there. It might be inside, might be outside, depends on the weather. First thing we're going to have at the table are some plates of homegrown tomatoes, sliced thickly, maybe served with a little bit of salt, not much else. We've grabbed those right out of the garden. We've gone to that garden in the morning, and we've picked a big mess of green beans. We've strung them, we've snapped them, we've cooked them a good long time, right? We put some fat back in there, some bacon or some ham hock, simmered them nice and long. We're also going to grab some corn from the garden, some ears of corn, but unlike those beans, we want to get the shucks off of those, we want to get those silks off of them, we want to get them in water as quickly as we can, get them to the table, have them with a little butter, a little bit of salt. We need a main dish, so let's have some fried chicken from a cast iron skillet, maybe dipped in a little bit of flour, crispy on the outside, juicy on the inside. We need a few more things from that skillet, so let's do some fried okra, fried squash, dip that in cornmeal, cook it in the hot oil, drain it on some paper towels, bring it to the table as hot as we can. It's summer. We need some potato salad. We need some coleslaw. Dress those with Duke's mayonnaise. If you're listening to me and you're in the eastern part of the United States, you probably know what I'm talking about. Duke's mayonnaise is a little harder to find here in Texas. We need biscuits. Let's get some hot biscuits out of the oven, flaky, nice size of a cat's head, right? Cat head biscuits. Serve those with some local jelly. We're in Western North Carolina, so we're probably going to use apple jelly from the orchards that are there, maybe a black raspberry jam from someone's favorite patch by the side of the road. Need some dessert, so let's go for some peach ice cream, homemade in one of those hand crank churns, packed tight with rock salt and ice. A good way to use up some energy. All those cousins, right, waiting for the meal to get ready. And then something to drink. So pitcher after pitcher of cold, sweet tea. All right. So I described that meal to you, and you may think, I see that meal, I'm ready to sit down, let's go. And I think that too, but I also look at that meal and I see these traces of history and culture. So let me give you some examples. If I knew nothing else about that family, I would look at that meal and guess that it is taking place in an area with a Native American legacy. I see the corn and I see the beans on the table. In Western North Carolina, that's likely to be Cherokee. I can see African American contributions to that particular meal in both the ingredients, like the okra, in some of the cooking techniques, like the frying, and in the labor assumed in some of the older recipes at the table. So some of our oldest biscuit recipes, cake recipes, were written with Black women's labor in mind, early on enslaved, later working as domestic workers. There's European ancestry at the table in the way the potato salad is made and the reliance on cabbage in that coleslaw. I can see immigration and diaspora stories at the table. If you think about the sweet tea and the black tea and the sweet tea, we can see British colonial trade routes that take us to East Asia. We can look at the sugar and think about that triangle between Africa, the Caribbean, Northern Europe, and the United States. It's a triangle of food and labor and capital. I can see gender at the table in terms of who's cooked what, where people sit, what foods are appropriate or thought of or best recipes from. I can see class at the table, although it can be a little harder to ferret out because most of those foods today sound like they're kind of down home or comfort foods. But that meal, for many of the years that it has taken place, was aspirational eating. It was the way people wanted to be able to eat every day. If I had described to you a meal that involved dove and squirrel and mountain trout and creasy greens and mustard, that might tell a different story of class. Speaking of down-home foods, there is actually technology hiding at the table, even if it seems like that was a very homemade kind of meal. We might think about the ice and the salt in that ice cream. It took technological innovations for us to be able to distribute those ingredients around the United States. All of that is technology at our table. And then finally, I think we would be wise to think about the politics that are at the table. Some of those are regional politics. So if you're listening to me and you're from Louisiana, you might be saying, where's the gumbo? If you're a coastal southerner, you're looking for the rice and you're looking for the shellfish. If you're from Kentucky, you might want burgoo. If you're here in Texas, you might be saying, where's the beef barbecue? Those kind of regional politics can be happening at a dinner table. I also mean politics in another term. So that is, we often talk about reconciliation in food. One of our most profound human gestures is to sit down across our differences and share a meal and start to talk to each other. But we get very fond of that story, and we don't remember as much the ways that a meal can emphasize how we are divided, how our social hierarchies work. It's not a coincidence that the modern civil rights movement happened with sit-ins at restaurants, because who eats where and why is part of our politics. So a meal is more than just what's on the plate. We're going to take a little bit of a break, and when we get back, I want us to start with one of the biggest myths that we have about Southern food and see where it takes us.